The room was too small for a moment that big. It's April 2nd, 1992, Federal Courthouse, Brooklyn. The air is heavy, cheap government ventilation fighting against a full load of bodies, wool suits, bad coffee, and fear. The jurors file in, single file. No one talks. The room that has heard weeks of arguments, cross-examinations, and outbursts now has a star witness who used to be one of them. Behind Gotti, family members sit shoulder to shoulder. His wife, Victoria, friends, loyalists. Their faces start at neutral and slide, slow and ugly, into something between disbelief and rage. The silence in the room is louder than any outburst. No one screams, no one rushes the bar. This isn't a movie. This is the federal government putting the most famous mob boss in America into a box he will never climb out of. Outside, it's a different story. On Cadman Plaza, cameras swarm like flies on a carcass. Satellite trucks, news vans, tripod legs tangled over each other. Reporters in trench coats shout updates into microphones, their breath visible in the spring air. The crowd is split. On one side, law and order spectators, cops' families, people who've waited years to see this guy in chains. For them, Gotti isn't a folk hero. He's the man behind bodies in alleys, drugs on corners, and union envelopes that never made it to the working stiff. On the other side, the fans. They show up like it's a parade. Leather jackets, gold chains, cigarette smoke curling in the cold air. They call him Johnny. They talk about him like he's Sinatra with a criminal record. For years, he walked out of court to their cheers, smiling, smirking, lighting cigarettes like victory cigars. Not today. The New York Post will scream it in black ink the next morning. Gotti guilty. No clever nickname, no swagger, just the blunt fact. Inside, the judge starts the ritual of a man's life being measured out in legal terms. Sentencing will come later. Today is just the hammer hitting the nail. 2 U.S. Marshals move in closer, just a step, but everyone sees it. The invisible circle around Gotti has shrunk. He's no longer the man walking out of a grand jury room laughing with reporters. He's property now. The smell in the courtroom has changed too. Less anticipation, more sweat. The government side of the room is still. No high fives, no pumping fists. They've been chasing this man for a decade. They know better than to celebrate until the ink is dry. At the back of the room, an FBI agent leans against the wood railing. He's one of the guys who sat in surveillance vans, listened to scratchy tapes of Gotti holding court at the Ravenite Social Club, heard him complain about money, about loyalty, about who should live and who should die. For him, this isn't just a case, it's the end of a hunt. The agent knows something the public doesn't. Gotti didn't lose because he was outgunned. He lost because the thing he worshipped most, loyalty, finally turned on him. One man in particular put him here, not a cop, not a prosecutor, his own underboss. Salvatore Sammy the Bull, the man who made bodies disappear for Gotti, the man who helped him take the Gambino family by force, the man who stood next to him as they buried the old boss and crowned a new one. Now, his testimony is buried in every guilty count the forewoman just read. Back at the defense table, Gotti leans in, says something low to his attorney. No one else can hear it. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's a threat, maybe it's nothing. But one thing is clear. For the first time in a long time, John Gotti is not writing his own script. He once walked into these buildings like he owned them, tailored suits, fresh haircut, a grin that said the rules didn't apply to him. He was the man who killed a sitting mafia boss in the middle of Manhattan and then strutted through Little Italy like he'd just signed a business deal. Now, he waits for marshals to cuff his wrists. When the hearing breaks, the guards step in. Metal meets bone. The handcuffs click. Sharp, final, mechanical. The sound cuts through the low murmur of the room. This is what the end of a mob dynasty sounds like. Not gunfire, not a car bomb, just government steel on aging wrists. Outside, the fans press against police barricades for one more look. Flashbulbs pop. Someone yells, "We love you, Johnny!" Someone else spits at the ground. He doesn't look at them. He keeps his eyes forward, jaw tight, shoulders squared. The walk is practiced, but the destination has changed. No Ravenite, no Burgeon Hunt and Fish Club, no late-night meetings with captains and soldiers. Just a cell. For the cameras, he's still playing the part, the last old-fashioned boss, the last man standing. But behind the glass of that transport van, the math isn't hard. Life without parole means exactly what it says. Somewhere between this courthouse and the federal lockup, the most feared man in New York becomes inmate number, just another number. The question isn't how John Gotti fell. That's easy. Jury, verdict, handcuffs. The real question is how a poor kid from Queens clawed his way to the top of the most powerful crime family in America, how he built an empire on fear, charm, and arrogance, and what made the man who preached loyalty end up betrayed by his own right hand. That story doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts long before the word guilty. The cell door closes in 1992 with a hard, final thud. Concrete, steel, fluorescent light that makes everything look the same color, dead. That's where John Gotti ends up, but that's not where he starts. Wind it back.
Bronx, then later Queens. Post-war New York, before the glass towers and tourists with cell phones. Back when the streets were cracked, the paint on the doors peeled, and the only thing more common than noise was disappointment. You don't need a baby picture to understand them, you need a block. Picture a narrow street with kids playing stickball under sagging phone lines. Their shoes are worn down to thin leather. Their jackets are hand-me-downs, patched and repatched. You can hear a mother yelling from a window, her voice bouncing off brick. Inside those apartments, too many bodies, not enough space. The stove doubles as a heater. The rent's always past due. Dad skips from job to job, or from bar to bar. It's a life built on trying to keep the landlord off your back and the cupboards from going completely empty.
This is where the idea of making it doesn't mean stock options or college. It means enough cash to move your family out of the Roach Motel. It means not being the guy everyone steps over on the sidewalk. And then, on Sundays, the street changes. They pull up in big American cars, shiny bumpers, fresh chrome that catches the light like a mirror. You hear the engine before you see them, the slow, confident idol of a man who's not late for anything. They step out in tailored suits, shoes polished to a black shine, pinky rings, fresh haircuts, no rush. They don't look up at the tenements look down at them. Those are the wise guys. To a kid on the corner, they might as well be astronauts from another planet. They're not cops because the cops have uniforms. They're not businessmen because they don't drag briefcases or look tired. These guys walk like they own time. They talk low, laugh large, and everybody gives them space without a word being said. And more important than the money or the cars, they get respect. The landlord doesn't talk to them like a problem. The butcher doesn't argue about the tab. When they walk down the block, men nod and women stare just a little too long. In a world where his father comes home defeated and broke, that contrast is burned into a young John's skull like a neon sign. On one side, honest work, bills that never end, and a life that feels like a slow choke. On the other, men who never seem to wait in line for anything. If you grow up here, you don't need a guidance counselor to explain your options. The block does it for you. He starts small. Petty hustles, hanging around older kids who know how to lift a wallet, boost a car, make a few dollars appear out of nowhere. For some, it's a phase. For John, it's an education. The cops collar him early and often. Look at one of those early mugshots. He's not smiling yet. No designer suit, just a young face that already looks like it's been in too many fights. There's a chip on his shoulder and a message behind his eyes. I'm not afraid of this. Jail, for most people, is the worst-case scenario. For him, it becomes something else, a cost of doing business. You go in, you keep your mouth shut, you come out. Maybe someone hands you an envelope, maybe they don't. Either way, if you don't break, your stock goes up. That's how the system works, and he learns it quick. By the time he's in Queens, there's one address that matters more than his home. A storefront with frosted windows and a harmless name, Bergen Hunt and Fish Club.
It's not about hunting. It's not about fishing. It's about power, coded as a neighborhood hangout. On the outside, it looks like any other working-class hole in the wall. Cheap sign, metal gate, cigarette butts in the gutter. On the inside, it's the living room of the Gambino family street operation in Queens. This is where bookmakers meet earners, where names get mentioned for new work, where messages are sent without phones and reputations are made or broken in an afternoon. A young John Gotti starts as a face in the background. He stands, he watches, he keeps his mouth shut unless someone speaks to him. He takes orders that older guys don't feel like handling. Drive this, pick that up, bring this envelope there. Forget you ever saw anything. You earn trust by not talking. You earn respect by not flinching. And when there's a job that requires someone willing to make a point with his hands, or with a bat, or with a gun, he doesn't hesitate. He graduates from corner hustles to real scores, hijacking trucks near the airport, leaning on small businesses for protection, collecting debts with his fists. If someone's late on a payment, he pays them a visit, not with a lawyer, with a reminder. The psychology is simple. Fear fills the gaps where the law doesn't reach. You don't need to file a lawsuit when a broken nose gets the message across faster. And in a world where your father could never collect on what he was owed, that power feels like a drug. Inside the Bergen, the hierarchy is clear but unwritten. The older guys sit at certain tables. Their coffee gets refilled first. Their jokes get laughed at, no matter how bad they are. They talk fights, money, union jobs, and who's up, who's down. John watches, memorizes, and slowly moves closer to those tables. Respect is everything here. Not the kind you earn from being nice or working overtime or paying taxes on time. Respect that comes from being the last person anyone wants to cross. He's not some reluctant soul dragged into darkness. This isn't a tragedy about a good man corrupted. He wants the power. He wants the look people give the guys in suits. The pause, the lowered eyes, the way conversations die mid-sentence when they walk in. To him, the straight life looks like a slow death. Punching a clock so someone else gets rich. Waiting for a raise that never comes. Watching your kids wear the same shoes until the soles fall out. The mob offers a shortcut. Brutal, illegal, but simple. Take what you can hold and keep what you can protect. Violence becomes his resume. He proves he can keep his cool when fists fly. He proves he can keep quiet when the cops come calling. He proves, most importantly, that he'll put the crew's interests above everything else. Above his own freedom, above his own family, if it comes to that. Every bruise, every night in a holding cell, every shout in the street outside the Bergen is a rung on the ladder. Look at another early mugshot. The boy is disappearing. The man is arriving. The eyes are colder. The mouth holds a hint of that future smirk. This is someone who has learned that the system is not for him, it's against him. So he decides to build his own. Was it survival? Sure, but not just survival. Plenty of kids on those blocks survived without becoming mobsters. They worked dead-end jobs, they kept their heads down, they tried to swallow their frustration and call it life. John Gotti wasn't interested in surviving quietly. He wanted to win loudly. The wise guys showed him a script where nobody checks your time card, and the only numbers that matter are on the bills in your pocket. The risks were high,
But the rewards were immediate: cash, deference, and a seat in the kind of rooms his father never got near. Standing in the Burgeon Hunt and Fish Club, cigarettes burning, coffee cooling, men talking low about moves and money, John Gotti wasn't thinking about prison cells. He was thinking about the top of the food chain, and the city was about to give him a bigger stage. From the cracked sidewalks of Queens to the boardrooms of Midtown, there was an entire economy waiting to be controlled. Unions, construction sites, nightclubs, gambling parlors, drug corners. And the Gambino family didn't just need soldiers. They were looking for leaders. One in particular would catch their eye: a street-tough enforcer from Queens who understood that fear, loyalty, and ambition could be turned into an empire. His name was already making the rounds in back rooms and clubhouses, attached to phrases like earner, stand-up guy, and doesn't scare easy. Soon enough, that name would outrun the neighborhoods that built it. The kid who stared at the wise guy's cars on the curb was about to become the man inside the back seat giving the orders. And the first step to the top of the Gambino family would be soaked in blood. By the mid-1980s, John Gotti isn't just another tough from Queens. He's a man with a problem. The boss of his world, Paul Castellano, lives in a mansion on Staten Island, eats like a banker, dresses like one too, and barely sets foot on the streets that feed his bank accounts. To Gotti and the guys who grew up breathing the pavement, Castellano is soft. Worse than soft, he's detached. And detached bosses make mistakes. Castellano refuses to visit dying underboss Aniello Della Croce in the hospital. He tightens his grip on money, loosens his grip on respect. He's rumored to be skimming too much from the top, pushing into drugs while pretending he's above them, and he's under federal indictment. From Gotti's angle, the writing is on the wall. If Castellano goes down, he'll take half the family with him. So Gotti decides to pick up the pen and rewrite the story. Not with a memo, with bullets. December 16th, 1985. East 46th Street, Manhattan. Cold enough that the air bites the inside of your nose. Office workers rush by with collars turned up, thinking about dinner, not murder. Sparks Steakhouse sits under a neon sign, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Inside, men in suits are slicing steaks and pretending the world outside can't touch them. For Paul Castellano, the boss of the Gambino family, this is just another dinner in Midtown. He's riding in from Staten Island in a black Lincoln, heading to meet his lieutenant and others for a nice red meat evening. What he doesn't know is that his own family has rewritten his final reservation. 4 men in trench coats wait in the cold, scattered along the block like they're just other New Yorkers killing time before a drink. Fedoras pulled low or fur hats tight, scarves up. Their hands are in their pockets, but they're not keeping warm. They're gripping pistols. Up the block, in a double-parked car, John Gotti sits with his close associate, Sammy the Bull Gravano. The car engine idles, heater on low, windows just fogged enough to hide their faces. From this vantage point, Gotti is both director and audience. He's about to kill the boss of the Gambino family without formal permission from the commission, the mob's board of directors. In that world, killing a sitting boss without approval is like trying to rewrite the Bible on your own. If it fails, there's no second chance. You don't get demoted, you get buried. The Lincoln pulls up in front of Sparks. Castellano steps out, a heavy man in a long coat, hat on, no idea he's walking into his obituary. His driver and bodyguard move with him. The shooters close in.
En un bursto de emoción y noise, mufflado por winter aire pero still loud enough a frisar pedestranes mid-step, guns coming out of pockets, arms extend y la street fills con the flat, brutal pop de gunfire. Castellano reel, hit en el head y chest. Su bodyguard goes down too. Blood spreads across the sidewalk, dark and glossy against the pale traces of dirty snow. People scream. Someone drops a shopping bag. A cab slams on its brakes. The shooters turn and walk, Don't run back into the city, disappearing into traffic and sidewalks, trench coats swinging. Back in the car, Gotti watches the scene like it's a play hitting its final act. Paul Castellano, boss of bosses, is dead on a Manhattan sidewalk in front of a steakhouse. It's not subtle, it's not distant, it's a headline waiting to happen. And that's exactly the point. This isn't just murder, it's a public resignation letter written in .38 and .45 caliber.
Within hours, the underworld knows what this means. Somebody just rolled the dice on the Gambino throne. Within days, everyone knows who. In the shadows of back rooms and social clubs, men whisper that John Gotti has taken over. There's no formal press release, no inauguration ceremony. But in the world that matters, the one of envelopes, union delegates, bookmakers, and killers, the shift is clear. The kid from Queens is now the boss of the Gambino family. And unlike past bosses, he doesn't stay in the dark. Old school dons treated publicity like poison. They avoided cameras, kept their addresses quiet, lived like shy millionaires in modest houses. Gotti does the opposite. He shows up in $2,000 suits, double-breasted, fabrics that look like they were tailored in a different country than everyone else's clothes, silk ties, French cuffs. He walks into the courthouse like it's his personal red carpet. He doesn't scowl or hide his face. He grims. He flashes that movie villain smile, like he's in on a joke the rest of the world doesn't get. And the world responds. Crowds gather outside each hearing and indictment. Housewives, local toughs, office workers on their lunch break, they all want to see the man the newspapers have turned into a character. To some, he's a criminal. To others, he's Robin Hood in a Brioni suit, a guy who tipped big, dressed sharp, and didn't look scared of anyone, not even the feds. He leans into it. After beating major cases, he comes out of court like a prize fighter who just went 12 rounds and didn't even sweat. Reporters shout questions. He cracks wise or says nothing at all, just smirks and keeps walking. That's how nicknames are born. First, the Dapper Don. Then, more dangerously, the Teflon Don. When a man at the top of an organized crime family keeps walking away from federal indictments, people start to believe the laws of gravity don't apply to him. That's exactly the illusion Gotti wants. Beneath the suits and the smiles, the machine is as ugly and efficient as any industrial plant. This isn't about a few bookmakers taking action on Sunday games. This is about an underground economy welded onto the legitimate one, bleeding it a little at a time. Start with the concrete club. In New York, every building above a certain size needs concrete. Skyscrapers are built on it, parking garages, apartments, office towers, they all depend on a small circle of suppliers. The mob figures out years earlier that if you control those suppliers, you control the prices. The Gambino family, along with other families, form an invisible cartel. Only certain companies get the contracts for major projects in Manhattan. Those companies kick up a cut. Competitors get squeezed, threatened, or quietly pushed off bidding lists. Developers don't ask many questions. They just see that every other acceptable bid comes in around the same bloated number. The difference between the honest price and the inflated one, that's mob profit. Multiply that across every major building project in the city, and you're not talking about pocket change anymore. You're talking millions. Then there are the unions. The Gambinos sink their hooks into locals, the Teamsters, construction unions, others. Once you have the right men in the right union positions, you don't need a gun to hold a job site hostage. You just need the threat of a strike or of problems on the line. A developer gets a visit. Nice project you got. Be a shame if your guys walked off, or if some equipment burned out in the night. He pays a consulting fee to a mob-controlled labor fixer. Magically, the strike never happens. Magically, the equipment doesn't break. The job runs on time, and the extra cost gets quietly folded into rent and office leases. The average worker might never see it. His check comes from the same place. But when Christmas bonuses vanish or pension funds run thin, the money didn't evaporate. It moved up. Add to that the basics on sports. Loan sharking at rates that would make a bank blush. Extortion of small businesses, bars, nightclubs, trucking companies. A bar owner gets behind on payments to a distributor. The Gambinos send someone to help. He pays them back at double-digit weekly interest. Miss a payment and someone pays him a late fee visit, up close, personal, and persuasive. If he cries to the cops, they might get one arrest, one conviction, maybe. The family, on the other hand, has a very simple collections department. Business owners do the math and keep their mouths shut. All of it floats up the chain. Soldiers hand over a piece of everything to captains. Captains bundle the cash and bring it to the boss. And the boss? He doesn't need to burn $100 bills to light his cigarette. He just doesn't bother counting them individually anymore. He sits at tables in the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, or back in Queens, men around him, all sending their profits upstream. The air is thick with smoke and cheap coffee, but the money that passes through is anything but cheap. For Gotti, this isn't just wealth, it's proof. Proof that he was right to choose this life. Proof that his instincts about fear, loyalty, and image are paying off. The government doesn't watch all this from afar. They wiretap phones. They flip small-time associates. They lean on bookies and Shylocks. They build thick case files, binders full of surveillance photos and transcripts. And still, when they drag Gotti into court in the late 80s, they lose. Part of it is luck. Part of it is skill. His lawyers are aggressive, relentless, charismatic in their own way. But a big part is darker. Jurors get tampered with. Money changes hands in quiet places. A juror burdened with debt or weakness suddenly has a way out if he votes the right way. Witnesses get visits. Not always threats, sometimes just a conversation that makes the stakes very clear. Nice family you got. We'd hate to see anything happen while you're spending so much time at court. When the verdict comes back not guilty, Gotti walks out the front door, and the feds walk out with tension headaches and ground-down teeth. The tabloids feast on it. The Teflon Don. Charges slide off. Trials break against him like waves against rock. Each victory in court is another brick in the myth. Inside his own head, that myth starts to harden into truth. He's beaten murder raps. He's walked away from racketeering charges. The FBI is listening, watching, pushing, and still he shows up at the Ravenite like he owns the block, laughing, chain-smoking, telling stories. He's not just a boss anymore. He's a celebrity criminal.
For a man who grew up watching wise guys glide through poor neighborhoods like royalty, this is the logical endpoint. He's the king now, and the entire city knows his name. Cops hate him. Fans adore him. Reporters orbit him. Politicians curse him in public and read the same stories in private. He confuses applause with safety. He mistakes fear for loyalty. And each time he strolls out of a courtroom victorious, the illusion grows stronger, that he can keep walking this tightrope forever, without a net, without ever slipping. But the thing about building an empire on intimidation and lies is simple. It works only as long as everyone believes you're untouchable. The moment someone close to you stops believing, the whole structure starts to shake. And while Gotti is soaking in the spotlight, smiling for cameras, and playing the role of the invincible kingpin, the FBI is listening to his every word, in the very rooms where he thinks he's most in control. The empire is making money. The suits are sharp. The public still chants his name. But in the walls and ceilings around him, another kind of empire, patient, methodical, bureaucratic, is quietly threading the wires that will strangle his. The Teflon Don doesn't know it yet, but the non-stick surface is starting to crack.
The higher a man climbs, the more he believes the rules below don't apply to him.
By the late 80s, John Gotti is so far off the ground he can't even see the street anymore. He's beaten big cases. He's turned a secret society into front-page theater. He walks in and out of courthouses like they're revolving doors made just for him. And when you start to believe you can't fall, you stop watching where you step. The Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street is Gotti's feckin' throne. From the outside, it's just another anonymous storefront in Little Italy. No neon, no fanfare, just a spot where older men in leather jackets smoke on the sidewalk. Inside, it's one of the most watched rooms in America. The FBI has cameras outside, agents in cars, photographers on long lenses. They film who goes in, who comes out, who lingers too long at the doorway, building charts, drawing lines, mapping out the living skeleton of the Gambino family. But Gotti thinks he's too smart to let the important stuff happen on the main floor. He uses the club like bait. The real conversations take place upstairs, in an apartment above the Ravenite. Rent-controlled, cramped, and, in his mind, safe. No cameras, no microphones. He believes that if he keeps the serious talk off phones and out of the formal club space, he's untouchable. But the men hunting him have learned something too. You don't beat a guy like Gotti head on. You get close, then closer, then inside. The FBI has been chipping away for years. Failed cases, half-flipped informants, lost trials. Each defeat is a lesson. They start placing bugs not just in phones, but in walls, in meeting rooms, in ceiling fixtures. They go after his social clubs one by one, like termites in a foundation. With the Ravenite, they get bold. They don't just wire the club, they wire the apartment upstairs. Think about that for a second. The one place Gotti believes is clean, where he vents, plots, criticizes his own men, is on tape. They listen to him complain about who's making money and who isn't. They hear him talk about murders in past tense and about discipline in present tense. They hear him discuss Sammy Gravano, his underboss, in a way that sounds less like admiration and more like positioning. It takes a special kind of arrogance to keep talking when you know the whole world is trying to listen. Gotti has that kind. The tapes are gold. Not cinematic gold, no shouting, no dramatic confessions. They're better than that. They're him. Unfiltered, unpolished. Not the dapper Don in front of cameras, but the boss in private. Vain, calculating, and crucially, willing to shift blame. He talks about the Castellano hit, about other hits, about who pushed for what, about who should take weight if things go bad. And Sammy the Bull Gravano's name keeps coming up. Not as partner, as shield. Gravano is no choir boy. He's an underboss with enough bodies on his conscience to fill a small cemetery. He came up the same way. Street work, enforcement, doing the things men like Gotti didn't want to be visibly tied to. Gotti's rise is soaked in blood, and Sammy was often the man holding the mop. In the old code, that meant something. You killed for your boss. You went to war for your family. You took the same risks and, if it came to it, the same fall. But on those tapes, Gotti's not sharing the fall. He's handing it to Sammy. In one conversation after another, Gotti criticizes Sammy, calls him greedy, minimizes his role, builds a narrative. If the government comes for them, the underboss was the loose cannon, the one out of control, the one who can be sacrificed. Gotti thinks he's just blowing off steam to trusted ears. The FBI knows he's writing their script for them. When agents finally bring Sammy in and sit him down, they don't start with threats. They start with a gift, a chance to hear what his boss really thinks of him. They hit play. Imagine being a man who is killed on command, who sat in cars outside murder scenes making sure the job was done, hearing your boss talk about you like you're a defective part he's already planning to return. Not a partner, not a brother in arms, a scapegoat. Gotti on the tapes is not following the old school rules. He doesn't say, if we go down together. He says, in essence, if somebody's gotta eat this, it won't be me. For a guy like Sammy, that's not just insulting, that's a death notice. There's a lazy way to tell this part of the story. Sammy flipped because he was scared of prison. Fear was part of it, but it wasn't the only thing. This is a man who'd already spent time inside, who'd spent decades living with the risk of a life sentence or a quick death. Prison was an occupational hazard, not a surprise. What changed wasn't the risk, it was the math. The code he grew up under was brutal, but clear. You keep your mouth shut. You take your time if you have to. You protect the boss, and the boss protects you, or at least doesn't sell you out. Those tapes made something plain. The boss had already voided the deal. The press later would cast Sammy as the traitor, the underboss who broke Omerta, the code of silence, the rat who brought down the king. But in his mind, that line was crossed first by Gotti, alone in that wired apartment, talking to his closest circle and positioning Sammy as the man to burn. Gravano didn't wake up one morning and decide to turn government witness out of nowhere. He listened to his life's work being carved up, his loyalty dismissed, his future sacrificed in someone else's damage control. Then he looked at what the government could already prove: the murders, the rackets, the structure of the family, the tapes in Gotti's own voice. He wasn't choosing between loyalty and betrayal in a vacuum. He was choosing between loyalty to a man who'd already thrown him under the bus, or loyalty to his own survival and his family's future. There's a line you hear sometimes in these circles: "I'll die for you." You don't hear, "I'll die for you while you blame everything on me and keep your hands clean." Sammy's conclusion: the code was already dead. Gotti killed it, upstairs at the Ravenite, long before Sammy took the stand. So when prosecutors offer him a deal, tell us how it really works, testify, and we cut your time down to something you can walk away from before you're in a wheelchair, he doesn't just see a path out of prison. He sees a way not to be the last sucker in a game where everyone else has already cheated. When he steps into that courtroom as a government witness, the air changes. The underworld is suddenly on trial from the inside. He doesn't talk like a lawyer. He talks like a man who's seen the bones under the skin. He walks the jury through murders, meetings, envelopes, bodies in cars, and instructions handed down from the man in the expensive suits. He maps out the Gambino family not as a myth, but as a business, ugly, efficient, and run from the top. And through it all, Gotti sits at the defense table, listening to the man who once killed for him, now killing something else, the legend of the Teflon Don. The paranoia starts long before the verdict. Inside the organization, guys who once thought about Gotti like a force of nature now whisper about bugs, about tapes, about who else might flip. Is that guy wired? Did that conversation 3 months ago end up on a reel-to-reel in some windowless room? They stop trusting the walls. They stop trusting each other. Organized crime runs on trust as much as fear. Fear keeps you from talking. Trust keeps you standing next to a man with a gun and believing it's not pointed at you. When that trust breaks, the whole structure turns hollow. The Ravenite, once a clubhouse, starts to feel like a trap. The upstairs apartment, once a sanctuary, is now a crime scene with carpets and furniture. And John Gotti, who spent years feeding on attention, now chokes on it. Every flashbulb reminds him that somewhere on a tape, his own words are being sharpened into knives. The irony is brutal. The same ego that made him a legend, the suits, the crowds, the need to be seen and heard, also made him sloppy. He thought he could control the narrative from inside that smoke-filled room above the Ravenite. Instead, he dictated his own indictment. Sammy Gravano didn't put the words in his mouth. The FBI didn't either. They just pressed record. Loyalty, once his favorite sermon, had turned into a one-way street. He expected men to die for him, but on those tapes, he wasn't willing to die for them. When Sammy flipped, it wasn't the first betrayal, it was the response to one. By the time the public reads headlines like "The Bull Flips," the real damage has already been done. The bugs are in, the tapes are rolling, the underboss is talking. The jurors, for once, are out of reach. The empire is still standing on paper, but in reality, the collapse has already begun. The word guilty hangs in the air longer than it has any right to. We've been here before. April 1992, Brooklyn, a courtroom too small for the size of the moment. The same verdict we opened with. The same slack silence after the forewoman reads the counts. Racketeering, murder, conspiracy. All of it sticks this time.
The difference now isn't in the word, it's in the weight. Before, acquittals had turned guilty into just another speed bump, an accusation to be laughed off later on Mulberry Street. This time, there's no suspense about what comes next. Life, without parole. It's not metaphor, it's arithmetic. No age adjustment, no second act. A man who built his entire identity on never being cornered is now officially never walking free again. The kind of place they send John Gotti doesn't have social clubs or sidewalk fans. It's concrete, razor wire, and a sky that might as well be another ceiling. Marion first. Later, a move to a higher security environment. The names change, the experience doesn't.
No oak-paneled clubhouse. No cheap paintings of ships on the wall. Just cinder block, a steel bunk, and a toilet bolted to the floor. The man who once chose his shirts by thread count now wears the same uniform as everyone else. Prison khaki or an orange jumpsuit, numbered and nameless. No Brioni, no silk ties, no gold watch glinting in camera flashes. The only fabric that matters now is whatever's between his shoulders and the chill in the air. There's a window, if you can call it that, slim, mean, giving you a slice of sky and not much else. You can't see Mulberry Street from here. You can't see Queens. Just a blank piece of world that doesn't care who you were. Visitors? A few family members. No crowds, no cheers. Just metal detectors, pat-downs, and a conversation through glass or in a monitored room where the guards are the biggest presence. His audience now is a corrections officer making rounds, peering through a window in the door. No tabloid headlines, no reporters jostling for a quote. In the old days, people leaned in at the Ravenite to hear what he thought about a score, a rival, a problem. In here, nobody's asking his opinion on anything that matters. The clock doesn't care about hierarchy. Hour after hour, the routine does what no FBI squad could do. It wears him down. The cigarettes catch up. The stress catches up. The years of bad living and worse peace of mind settle into his body like concrete. Throat cancer. For a man who loved to talk, it's a cruel joke. The disease that takes root is the one that claws at your voice, at the very thing that made him the center of every room he ever walked into. Surgeries, hospitals, chains even on a gurney. No entourage, no soldiers at the door. Just doctors, guards, and the slow, clinical movement toward the end. He dies in 2002 in a federal prison hospital, 61 years old, a lifetime inmate. There's no grand finale, no shootout, no last stand. Just a body moved quietly out of a government facility, tagged and processed like any other inmate who ran out of time. Back on Mulberry Street, the Ravenite shuts down. Eventually, another business takes its place, a boutique, a shoe store, something harmless, the kind of place where tourists browse without knowing what used to be discussed behind those walls. No smoke curling into the street, no clusters of men in leather jackets outside scanning traffic automatically, just shoppers. That's the real obituary for the old mafia, more than any headline. The places that once ran on whispers and coded glances now run on sales tax and background music. There's a line law enforcement likes to repeat. John Gotti did more to destroy the American Mafia than any task force ever did. It's not praise, it's diagnosis. By turning himself into a public figure, by loving the cameras, the headlines, the nicknames, he dragged an underground system into the harshest light it had ever seen. Old school bosses thrived on invisibility. They treated fame like a contagious disease. Their power didn't depend on the public knowing their names. In fact, it depended on the opposite. Gotti flipped that script. He made mob life look glamorous and unstoppable, right at the moment it was most vulnerable to surveillance, wiretaps, and RICO laws. His trials became tutorials for prosecutors: how to penetrate a crime family, how to flip an underboss, how to make tapes and testimonies play like a symphony in front of a jury. After Gotti, every serious mobster knew, if an underboss like Sammy could flip, anyone could. The code of silence wasn't broken in one day. It corroded, case by case, under the weight of long sentences and the realization that guys at the top might use you as a shield. In the decades that followed, the Mafia didn't disappear completely. It shrank, it scattered, it went quiet, back to the shadows, fewer social clubs, more paranoia, less swagger. The days of a boss strutting out of a federal courthouse in a $1,000 overcoat, smiling for cameras, were over. Nobody wanted to be the next John Gotti. Not because they didn't want the money, because they saw the ending. In Queens, his grave is clean, polished, visited. The name Gotti, carved in stone, solid and permanent in a way his freedom never was. People still stop there, some out of respect, some out of morbid curiosity, some because the myth is hard to let go of. They leave flowers, they take pictures, they talk about the last real boss. In movies, in books, in documentaries, his image keeps working. The suits, the hair, the smirk, the nickname that stuck harder than any indictment, the Teflon Don. He got what he wanted. He became a legend. But legends come with a bill. He lost the streets he grew up on. He lost his freedom decades before his heart gave out. He lost the organization he claimed to live and kill for, shattered, exposed, turned into a case study for prosecutors and crime textbooks. In trying to be bigger than the code, he broke it. In trying to be untouchable, he made the entire mafia a priority target. The poor kid from Queens who stared at wise guys' cars ended up with something even they never had: global infamy. It just cost him everything a man in his world was supposed to protect: his family's future, his soldiers' loyalty, the secrecy that kept his kind alive. John Gotti wanted to be more than a boss. He wanted to be remembered. He got his wish. But the story carved into his legend is simple, and it's not the one he told on Mulberry Street. If you build an empire on fear, image, and betrayal, you might win the crowd. You just won't live long enough to enjoy the applause.